Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful for the time that we have to study together here this morning. We invite your Spirit's presence. Give us wisdom and understanding and strength for this day. May our hearts be united through thy Spirit and through thy truth. As we examine this foundation, especially in connection with the daily, Lord, we pray that you can make it clear to our minds, help us to see the things that we have missed and to correct us of any error. Thank you for hearing our prayer. Be with us now, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, good morning, everyone. And as we're continuing this study on the examination of the foundation, right now we're looking at the daily. And yesterday, I tried to illustrate something. I don't think I illustrated it very well. And I'm going to come back to that. And I'll try to explain what I saw. And we're then going to go and examine some Ellen White statements, and then we're going to come back to this. But so I'll just kind of sum up what I saw yesterday. So we have the daily and the transgression of desolation in Daniel chapter 8, and we know that this is dealing with the transition of paganism being placed upon the throne of the earth in the form of the papacy. It has to do with worship. The symbolism in Daniel 8 is the sanctuary, but a corrupted sanctuary. So it's about the counterfeit and this transition from pagan Rome to papal Rome that happened in the 6th century. But it's a little bit different than what you see in Daniel 11:31 and 12:11, which are also addressing this transition from pagan to papal Rome. I guess if anything, it's focusing maybe more upon the military aspect of it. And it is addressing the two 1260s in an indirect way in Daniel chapter 12, because it doesn't mention the second one particularly. It refers to the first one, and then it refers to the 1290, and then the 1335. So you have to go in Daniel to chapter 725 to get the second 1260, or times and a half. And then we have the references in Daniel 9, where we have the destruction of the sanctuary and the temple that results from the rejection of Christ and the close of probation for the Jews. And what I saw is that destruction of the second temple becomes a type that is expressed in this counterfeit 2520 that goes from 723 BC to 1798. That is, you can see in this week of Christ, there's this parallel. And so there's something there that we're missing when we look at Jesus' statement, when you see the abomination of desolation as spoken by Daniel the prophet. Now, another point, and we're going to come back to this, in Daniel chapter 8, there is the latter part where it quotes basically or paraphrases Deuteronomy 28. Because in Daniel chapter 8, when it addresses Deuteronomy 28, that's addressing the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome. Now, Daniel's writing at a time that Jerusalem has already been destroyed by Babylon. And he's referring to Leviticus 26 throughout his book, because what the book of Daniel is about is he's in the midst of this, and personally, he's involved in the second 7 times, because wild beasts shall rob you of your children. That's Daniel's captivity. So he's involved actively in this judgment of Leviticus 26, these corrective chastisements. And his book is addressing the end of these periods, primarily from his perspective. He's concerned about the end of the captivity and the restoration of the temple and all these things. But out of nowhere, 19 years before the fall of Babylon, he's given this vision of Daniel chapter 8. And he's being directed to something way in the future. And that's not what he's interested in. He's interested in his time. But he's being directed to something way in the future. And that's why in Daniel chapter 9, 19 years later, when Babylon falls in the first year of Darius, he's looking at the end of the 70 years, his personal 70 years, he knows began in the fall of 607. He knows when he was taken captive. But he knows it's the end of the 70 years for Babylon. That is, the prophecy about Babylon has been fulfilled. And he knows that there's these prophecies of 70 years, and he's trying to understand the end of them. And then he's going to be given this 70-week prophecy, which is based on Leviticus 26. And then later in Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12, once Darius has passed away and Cyrus is on the throne, he is again seeking God. This time he's going to fast for 3 weeks before he's given this answer. And that answer is 10, 11, and 12, or chapter 11, I guess, and 12. Chapter 10 is his vision itself. And in there, he's going to address again the issue of the daily that he saw in chapter 8. Now, he does address it in chapter 9, but not in those terms. He's going to talk about it in this idea of the people of the prince that shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that's in Daniel chapter 8 as well. But now it's much more defined, not this king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences that you get in chapter 8. So now Jesus has this statement about the abomination of desolation as spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And you would have to know that he's talking about 70 AD. But you also see, based on Daniel, that he's talking about events way in the future. And so he's talking about the end of the world. So we can clearly see in Jesus' words that the destruction of Jerusalem is a type of the end of the world. And that's what Ellen White brings out in the first few chapters of The Great Controversy. So in his methodology, Jesus' methodology, on how he's going to look at Daniel, there's some extremely powerful arguments for the historical interpretation of prophecy, but also for the triple application of prophecy, taking these different histories and lining them up for the time at the end of the world. And of course, we see this all through the Bible. But this has been missed partly because of our misunderstanding or rejection of the 2520 and many things in Daniel that we miss out on, that we don't make the connections. So I know this is a long explanation, but the problem that I had yesterday is there's all these different pieces of the puzzle, and their connection between each of them is they're all connected together into this picture, but I don't think we have all the pieces yet. And so trying to bring this all together for you to see it wasn't very easy. And I think as we go through this study of the daily and we start to go back and forth and we look at, and when we look at the new view of the daily, I think we will see where they went astray and why we have to go back and accept the pioneer view of the daily. But there's also additional insight that we have on the pioneer view of the daily, because even the pioneer view of the daily changed in certain aspects of it. That is, looking at the arguments of the verses themselves, Miller didn't, he got the right answer, but he didn't show his work properly, and some of his work was faulty, but he still ended up with the right answer. I've done that lots, in math. So the same thing has happened with Miller. God led him to certain conclusions. And the other part that we have to address is the 1290 and the 1335 and their connection, why they are put there in Daniel chapter 12. And then we know that there is a guy named Heidi Hikes who wrote material specifically to destroy the daily. And he's not an honest author, which I always dislike. I hate reading people who are knowingly lying to you, but he does this. Yeah.
Would you say that he's knowingly trying to destroy the daily, or he's knowingly trying to destroy the understanding, the correct understanding of the daily?
Yeah. He's definitely trying to muddy the waters so that you will accept his conclusion. And anybody who presents an argument that presents the weakest positions of what he's arguing against and misrepresents the true position so that he can win his argument is not honest.
Well, he was just rehashing Ford, wasn't he?
People say that. I don't think so. I don't think, I heard Jeff say that, but I think Jeff heard that through hearsay, not necessarily through his own personal study. There was I think it was Dwayne Dewey, he tried to argue that Heidi Hikes was using some document of Ford's or something like that, and that he was just reproducing Ford's work. And I don't find evidence for that. Or maybe it wasn't even Ford's. It could have been Froome's, something that Froome had done, maybe, if I remember correctly.
Froome more than Ford.
Yeah, Froome. It was supposed to be something that Froome had done, a document that Froome had produced, and basically Heidi Hikes was just reproducing this document. And I don't think that that's the case, but he intentionally misrepresents things that he's misrepresenting because he knows better. He demonstrates that he knows better. Now, maybe he is reproducing something of Froome's or some ideas that Froome had, and that's always possible, I guess. But whatever he's doing, it's definitely not straightforward. And what I always try to do with something that I think, when I have an idea or an insight into something that I think is insightful, is I bring all the arguments I can against it. I look at all the weaknesses of what it is. And often I've actually been way more critical of my conclusions and my different evidences than anybody else ever has. That is, I have understood the problems that exist that nobody else has even ever looked at. So any sort of way to attack our position, I've looked at that I can think of, and I've always welcomed new attacks. That's one of the reasons you go into discussion, at least for me personally, because it helps me unpackage things. The more that something's examined, then I can see its weaknesses. But often what I see when something is true, the more it's examined, the stronger it becomes. It doesn't become weaker. So truth can always bear investigation. And the more investigation you place upon it, the stronger truth becomes. So anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to show yesterday, which we're going to come back to. But what we want to look at right now is, I'll bring this up on the screen. So this was what we had read, this paragraph here. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced and darkness and confusion have followed. Time has not been a test since 1844, and it will never again be a test. So we have this statement from early writings. Now, there's a number of things about it. So first off, is this written before the new view of the daily has come in?
Well, actually, the new view is the old Protestant Catholic view.
Okay, well, that's not true. So the new view of the daily is not an old view. It is actually new. You couldn't say that it's the old Catholic Protestant view. That's going to really confuse people if they believe that, because you won't find the new view of the daily anywhere except in Adventism. So I could probably try to illustrate that at some point to show you what the old views of the daily were. Because basically the old view of the daily is that the daily refers to the literal earthly sanctuary. That's the old view. There's no view that I know of where the daily referred to the heavenly ministry of Christ until Adventism.
That from Conradi brought that in.
Yes. Now there
His brainchild.
Yeah. Now we're also going to look at Crozier's view and what he says, and we're going to see that people have misrepresented that Crozier isn't teaching the new view. But Ellen White's saying here that they were united on the new view of the daily, and then, but errors have been brought in. That is, but in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced. So one is we're going to need to understand what these other views are that she's talking about at this early writing of this. So this is early writings. This is not 1905 that she's writing this. So what is she talking about? That's one of the things we're going to have to look at. And I would say that part of the problem that we have here is that the waters have been muddied, not so much by those that are supporting the old view, but by those that support the new view. And many of us have actually bought into those arguments unwittingly. That is, we're not really sure what the old view was, and we're not even really understanding what the new view is. And we're not understanding this history of what she's talking about. So the way that they would put this, okay, what do you think people would say were these other views that have been embraced? Anybody know what the new view people, what the theologians today would argue about this passage?
Well, I'm thinking about the little booklet Jeff wrote on the Adventism's new view back in the late 90s.
Okay. Yeah, so, which is kind of being addressed in these notes here, because this is the late 90s. Jeff is putting this together. So what other views had been embraced? So if they were united upon the true view of the daily, and Ellen White's writing here in early writings that other views have been embraced, what are those other views according to those who hold the new view? Or does anybody know what the new view, what they say now about what these other views were? Oh, okay, how about this? Does anybody know what the other views were that have been embraced that Ellen White is referring to? And she's making this statement in 1850. Well, we're going to look at her statement. Okay, let's go over here. I'm going to go to the original statement. Now, this is a October 23rd, 1850, and this manuscript here is a vision given on October 23rd, 1850. And so Ellen White's in Brother Nichols' house in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And this is where we get some of the things about the gathering and the scattering time. Where I saw that God had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. Now, the main difference that you're going to see in this document over what's in early writings is some of the references to people. Little passages are taken out because they weren't really considered relevant at the time early writings was put together. Let's look at one of these passages here. It's kind of interesting. She says, I saw the two-horned beast had a dragon mouth, and that his power was in his head, and the decree would go out of his mouth. Then I saw the mother of harlots, that the mother was not the daughters, but separate and distinct from them. She has had her day, and it is past. And her daughters, Protestant sects, were next to come on the stage and act out the same mind that the mother had when she persecuted the saints. I saw that as the mother had been declining in power, the daughters had been growing, and soon they will exercise the power once manifested by the mother. Now, the way this is placed or phrased is a little different than we would have seen in other places. So what are some of and this is kind of an aside from the daily a bit, but what is it you see about how she's writing here, and what is she talking about?
Well, she's talking about the decline of Rome and the increasing power of the Protestant churches.
Okay, yeah. Now she also says, I saw, right? So what does this mean? So she was in vision October 23rd, 1850. And she says, I saw. So what does that mean about what she's describing?
That God showed it to her in vision, so it has to be right.
Okay. Yeah. So she saw it in vision. Now, how does she see? I saw the two-horned beast that had a dragon mouth, that his power was in his head. Then I saw the mother of harlots, and I saw that as the mother had been declining. Right, she's going to see in the next paragraph, I saw that the nominal churches and nominal Adventists like Judas would betray us to the Catholics.
We might say she was saying, I understood, or I came to know.
Okay, I don't think we would, because she sees it in vision. When she says, I saw, she saw it in vision. But is she describing exactly what she saw? Like visually?
So you're talking about how was it portrayed to her?
Yeah, so I believe that she does see things, but she's not describing exactly what she's visually seeing in her vision, because it is a vision, it's visual. It's not just that she gets impressions or something. But, and so she probably would have seen this two-horned beast that had a dragon's mouth, right? She would have seen, so certain part of this are visual. But she's also seen other things that aren't really visual things. I mean, maybe it is in some way she can see their power declining in some way, but she's not describing all the details of what she actually saw. She's basically summing it up in vision what she saw. Now, she sees a lot of things here. Are they all connected?
They don't appear to be on the surface.
Yeah, well, they're not. So not everything she says just follows logically from the next thing. That is, she sees different things. Just like any prophet would see in vision, they're going to see some things, and then they're going to see something else. They're going to see something else. Now they are in a sense connected, but not in a direct way. It's not like this is just one continuous vision teaching us one thing. There's many things that she's going to say she saw. Now, like she'll say, then I saw that Jesus' work in the sanctuary was almost finished. Almost finished. Notice this doubling. So why do you think she doubles this in her description?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I noticed that before.
Yeah. But it's interesting because when Ellen White's writing, she's writing, she's not a dictator. She's not being dictated to. She's not just transcribing what God says to her. She's not just writing word for word something that she's hearing. She had a vision and now she's going to write it out. But she is guided in how she writes it out, she says. So this doubling, almost finished, maybe even in vision, she was told this, almost finished. Now, this is 1850. So she saw that Jesus' work in the sanctuary was almost finished. And after his work there is finished, he will come to the door of the tabernacle or the door of the first apartment and confess the sins of Israel upon the head of the scapegoat. So this is something we saw later that I never really noticed. I always thought that the sins were confessed on the head of the scapegoat after the time of Jacob's trouble. We can see this is going to be before the time of Jacob's trouble, right? Yeah, and then you're going to have the plagues are going to come upon the wicked and all these different things that happen after that. She says, I saw that it would take time to bear him away into the land of forgetfulness after the sins were put upon his head. So this is something we studied before. But my main point here is that she says, I saw things and she's writing them down. But this is, and this is sort of a flow as you go through different things, because it was talking about the Sunday law, and then you're going to talk about the close of probation and so forth. So there is some connection, but it's not like the different things when she says I saw can be quite different aspects of this. And she's going to be told things like the great white cloud I saw was not in the holy place, but entirely separate from the holy and most holy. So she's addressing particular points, some of these that were controversies or clear up controversies that existed at the time. So she's given this for a reason. Now, what about the time, October 23rd, 1850? What's the significance of when she's given this vision?
6 years after the disappointment.
Okay. So 6 years after Hiram Edson's vision in the cornfield. Right? So I think that's significant. Now, what about the time in general? What's happening in 1850?
You're looking for historical events?
No, just within Adventism.
Well, James White's beginning to identify the church as Laodicea.
Okay, so yeah, so we have the church is being identified as Laodicea. We also are going to have the 1850 chart. Now, when's that published? Anybody know?
January 1851.
Right. So it's actually shortly after this.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're starting to understand some things and they're going to put them upon the chart. Okay. Now, I don't know why it has the word I here by itself. And then I'm not sure if this is some mistake in the computer program or whether she wrote the word I there and then she started a new paragraph.
Could be a typo.
Yeah, it could be a typo. There's lots of typos in the E.G. White disc. So probably on the E.G. White estates, it would be corrected. So manuscript 15, 1850. I'm sure Dwight's going to look it up right now. So then we have this statement, which we saw in early writings, but it's a little bit different. Then I saw the daily, that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the first angel's message. So when was the correct view of the daily given?
Before 1844.
Okay. Now, when we talk about the correct view of the daily, this has to do with the two desolating powers. Now, what people will try to argue now is that this is just over the whether the word sacrifice was added or not, which I think is pretty ridiculous argument. But so it says, when union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But since, in the confusion, other views have been embraced and darkness has followed. I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844, and that time never again will be a test. So what are some of the differences we see with this and the early writing statement? I know we don't got them side by side here.
I thought in early writings, they left out some of this right here. They
Okay.
just put time will never be a test, and that's it, right? They got
Yeah, time has not been a test. Where here she says, I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844, and that time never
I left that.
test. What's
Yeah,
that?
they left that out. I said, yeah, they left that out.
Yeah, and they left out the I saw. Now, I mean, Ellen White's involved in putting together early writings. It's not like a bunch of other people came and just put early writings together. But what they were trying to do, Ellen White and those that were helping her, is to make things flow a little bit better. Now, here we also have these paragraphs that are in on the E.G. White, probably that when they put this together from the letter, we're not looking at the original letter as it was written. We're looking at a manuscript, 1850. And a lot of these manuscripts were copied, and so it's hard to know exactly how the paragraphs looked. But one thing we will see is that often when she says I saw, she's talking about something different. For instance, she then says, then I had a view of Sister Minor and others with her, that their visions were not true, that God had not spoken by them. I saw that if we are to go to Jerusalem, then the truth should not be made plain upon tables, for our mind should be turned towards Jerusalem, and our means should be reserved to get the saints to Jerusalem. I saw that the faults and errors of Sister Minor and those with her in past time had not been confessed. This is the reason why they have been left to run into great errors. I saw that Brother Bates must be careful and be willing to receive light that comes in other ways besides through visions. I saw that he too was slow to receive light from his brethren. So this part is not in early writings in this way, right?
Right.
Well, you can illustrate that every time she says, I saw, she's introducing a new idea.
Yeah, it's something that she saw. It's
Nearly
something
every time she says, I saw.
Yeah. Now, anybody know who Sister Minor is?
I've heard of her, but I'm not familiar.
Okay, so she was one of the people who early saw that Samuel Snow was correct in having Jesus, that the 2300 days and the 2520, etc., would end in the fall of 1844. And she wrote some articles in connection with Samuel Snow's articles. So what is this thing about going to Jerusalem? And is this connected to the false view of the daily that was introduced in her time?
Didn't this Sister Minor advocate that we needed to travel to Jerusalem to fully understand what the Bible was saying?
Yeah, and something about that there was this work to be done in Jerusalem. Basically, they're taking the view that literal Israel is going to be fulfilling these prophecies. Right? So they're not looking to spiritual Israel, they're looking to literal Israel. Basically, it would be an early type of messianic Adventism, if you want to call it that. So people believe in the literal Jews now, literal Jerusalem. So they're looking at the prophecies. So what would they be thinking about the daily?
Something about the sacrifices going on at Jerusalem, but there were no sacrifices
Right.
happening in those
So
days.
they believe that the daily has to again be set up in Jerusalem. That is, they think the daily is the daily sacrifice that was taken away, and that has to be restored. So these are what she talks about. Other views have been embraced and darkness has followed.
So this is the beginning of Christian Zionism way back then?
I don't know if it's the beginning of it, because I think it existed already before this time. It was actually a pretty common view. But for Adventists to accept it, who had been looking for Jesus to come, why are they now focused upon Jerusalem? What is it that they are now understanding in their mind about Bible prophecy? What's the error that they have fallen into after 1844?
It's this whole Turkey as the king of the north thing and is going to attack Jerusalem, be destroyed, and that'll mark the close of probation.
Okay, yeah. So they're taking these things literally. That's the problem, right?
Yes.
Okay, so they're not applying, and they're continuing some things, seeds that had been planted, even though Miller would have been a believer in spiritual Israel, that he's not looking to literal Israel to fulfill the prophecies. We were still looking at some aspects of things that were literal, such as Turkey, and that would be related to the close of probation. You know, these battles between the king of the north and the king of the south, being Turkey and Egypt, with France being involved. So that's how they're interpreting Daniel chapter 11.
It's unfortunate that they're getting all that from Uriah Smith, who was
Well, they're not getting it from
greatest
Smith.
book on prophecy.
Yeah, but Smith isn't
from Litch before Smith.
From Litch, right? Yeah, so they're getting this from Josiah Litch, and so they have this literal interpretation of some things, and it's going to lead to, after their disappointment, to all different kinds of errors. So there's going to be the spiritualizers, but these would be the people who are the literalizers, I guess, if you want to call it that. They're now looking to Jews in Jerusalem, and they believe that that's the responsibility, to go to Jerusalem, because somehow we need to be involved in that. So I haven't read a lot of the literature at that time of these different views. Now, so Dwight has a comment.
A couple of things to look at here. 8 paragraphs above where we're working.
Yeah.
She was giving that she saw that the truth should be made plain upon tables.
Yeah.
Now, that the earth and the fullness thereof is the Lord's, and the necessary means should not be spared to make this plain.
Yeah.
So she's giving a progression of items that she was seeing as she's coming down to this. I also find it very interesting that this manuscript was written 6 years to the day
Right.
after the Great Disappointment,
Mhm.
but was was also written approximately 10 months after the death of William Miller, because he passed December of 1849.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of this that's going on that Mrs. White is being shown that is to encourage the faith of those that came through the Great Disappointment.
Mhm. Yeah, and because they're planning the paper, the present truth, right?
Correct.
So they're planning that. They're making new charts. That's going to happen, right? So when she says, "I saw that the truth should be made upon plain upon tables," part of this has to do with the coming chart that's going to come a couple months later.
So the 1850 chart came out in 1851.
Yeah, January of 1851, it's published,
Okay.
but they
So
call it.
it was in process at this time.
Yeah. Okay, and they always called it the 1850 chart. So there's a bunch of things. So she's going to talk about it. The truth should be made plain upon tables, and notice she's going to refer to that later. Where she's talking about Sister Minor. I saw that if we are to go to Jerusalem, then the truth should not be made plain upon tables. For our mind should be turned towards Jerusalem, and our means should be reserved to get the saints to Jerusalem. So she's saying we're going to use all of our money to go to Jerusalem. We're not going to have the money to make these charts. At least that's how I take it. And then also there's these other ideas that are coming in that are contrary to what the group is decided. Now, Sister Minor, for Ellen White to write about Sister Minor in this way, what would this imply about Sister Minor's relationship to this small group in 1850? Because is she writing about somebody they're not really having contact with, who's just somewhere else doing something? Or is this somebody who has in some ways been studying with them or somehow connected to them?
Sounds like she's been studying with them.
Yeah, at some point. I'm not sure where the division has arisen, but there definitely Sister Minor would be having an effect upon the people that she's writing to.
Agreed.
Yeah, it would be like us talking about Tess, right? It'd be something that, and she's also calling her Sister Minor, in showing that there's this relationship. Now we know that she was involved in 1844, writing articles in agreement with Samuel Snow. So she was, and they would be published sometimes in the same publication, the same date that Snow would have some of his publications. And I haven't gathered together all of her studies. Now we know that Snow went off into error, believing that he was Elijah. And there's a bunch of interesting material from Snow where he's dealing with the criticisms that he's receiving. And Snow is not very straightforward. He tends to talk out of both sides of his mouth. Once he starts feeling that he's really important, he's quite misrepresenting his own position at different times. So it's kind of a sad story looking at Samuel Snow. But I don't know how much, these different groups, because you're going to have all these different people who have gone through the disappointment. You're going to have the larger body of group, which would be the organization. basically that Miller had set up along with Himes, going into becoming First Day Adventists. But then you're going to have all these other little groups with different explanations of what happened on October 22nd. And you got the spiritualizers. Sister Minor isn't one of those, right? She's now this group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Life Sketches, 1880. And I'm looking at page 229.
Okay, so let's go there. Okay, so
You're in Life Sketches there. There's Life Sketch above that. There's Life Sketches 1880.
okay, way up there. Okay. Do you know which chapter?
No, I've got the page open.
So, to pages
229.
Okay, 229. So you're gonna have to go back here. Okay. Okay, so you got CS Minor, Sister CS Minor. Is that
Right.
what you're looking at?
Correct.
Okay.
So about this time, Sister C.S. Minor came from Philadelphia, and we met in Boston. Different errors were affecting the Adventist people. The spiritual view of Christ's coming, the great deception of Satan, was ensnaring many, and we were often obliged through a sense of duty to bear a strong testimony against it. Sister Minor's influence was in favor
Yeah, keep going.
of the idea of a spiritual second advent, which prevailed at that time, although she felt unwilling to acknowledge it. Those who stood clear from this influence were obliged to be decided and have nothing to do with it, but in the fear of God, bear the testimony against it.
Okay, and so we have one paragraph here. So a spiritual second advent. So did they believe, and I'm not sure what they believed. So,
Well,
so this is something we need to understand, because I know there was those that believed that Jesus came spiritually to the earth on October 22nd, 1844.
okay, but if you come down to page 230,
Okay.
it's toward the bottom of your screen right there.
Yeah.
I knew their only object was to mangle the visions, spiritualize away their literal meaning, and throw a satanic influence upon me and call it the power of God. Sister Minor addressed me, urging me to relate the visions. I respected her, but knew she was deceived in regard to that company. I refused to relate my vision to them. We told them that they had no fellowship with their spirit, and in the name of the Lord would resist it. They flattered, but it had no effect. Then they tried to terrify me, commanding me. They said it was my duty to tell them the visions. I faithfully warned those whom I believed to be honest, begged them to renounce their errors and leave the company that was leading them astray. I left them free from their influence and spirit. A portion of that company in a few weeks were left to run into the basest fanaticism.
Okay. So what it seems like here, and because I'm not as familiar with this history as I should be. So when she's talking about spiritualizing their literal meaning, and they're talking about going to Old Jerusalem, we would take that sort of more as taking it literal, but how is it that they're spiritualizing their literal meaning according to Ellen White? What would she mean by that?
Okay, if we look at it right now,
Yeah.
do we believe that Christ is literally returning to this earth, or do we believe that he is spiritually returning to this earth?
He's literally returning.
Okay.
Yes.
So the context that I'm reading here is that they were believing that Christ was going to return spiritually Because, I mean, at this point, we have many churches that are saying that there's going to be a secret rapture where Christ returns, takes certain people and leaves others, right?
Yeah.
So here, the context would seem to be speaking of that type of a return rather than the literal return that we have come to accept.
Yeah. I just saying, I don't know all the details. I do know that they want to go to Jerusalem,
Right.
which would be applying literal Israel as having something to do with prophecy, like literal Jerusalem, where that wouldn't fit in with Miller's rules.
I
But
wonder if they would,
but she says here, that they try flattering her. Like they actually, their only object was to mangle the visions.
Right.
Okay, Jeff had a comment, I think.
No, it's Chris. I think Chris.
well,
Chris.
I just was saying, I wonder if their trip to Jerusalem was looking, if they were expecting to find evidence of this spiritual coming of the Lord.
Yeah, I don't know. Now there was also reinterpretations of some of the prophecies I know connected with that. Now, so part of the problem that we have here, so we don't know this history really well. I don't, at least. I know, and I should say, part of it is it has been misrepresented. So that would be part of the problem, because in when you look at the historians and how they look at this, what they're going to tell you is that when Ellen White's talking about the true view of the daily, she's not talking about the true view of the daily. She's talking about certain aspects in connection with time setting, right? That's what they're going to tell you. And so they're going to paint a picture of this whole history, that there are people who are setting time, reapplying the time prophecies, which is true. There are people doing this, but they group it all together and say that it has something to do with a new view of the daily that Ellen White is speaking against. But she's not saying that our view of the daily was correct, which really makes no sense. I mean, you have to really wrest her words in order to get that type of thing out of it. But when they take this statement, time is never going to be a test, they're saying that this new view of the daily that was brought in has to do with time setting, and that's what she's speaking about. But of course, that really doesn't still help their position, because they're going to come up with a new view of the daily, and then they're going to try to argue that the old view of the daily was error, even though Ellen White says the pioneers were united on the correct view of the daily. So they're just going to take certain aspects of the daily that Ellen White says was correct. But yet we see in the Great Controversy, Ellen White lays out the pioneer view of the daily without ever mentioning the daily. So, and that view is rejected by Adventism. That is, they don't accept the two desolating powers, and they don't accept the transition of the daily by being taken away in 508 and the papacy being set up in 538 as having anything to do with the correct view of the daily, right? Now you have Heidi Hikes, who's then going to try to have the new view of the daily. So we're going to see this when we get into the new view of the daily. We're going to look at Heidi Hikes' statements. And he's going to try to preserve the 1290 and the 1335. He's always going to position himself as a conservative Adventist in support of the spirit of prophecy. But he's going to do so upon completely different arguments than the old view of the daily. So he's going to preserve the times, the 1290 and the 1335, but make completely different arguments for them than Miller did. And that's why his view was so dangerous, Heidi Hike's view, is because many conservatives then adopted the new view who used to hold on to the old view of the daily through Heidi Hike's book, came to accept the new view because the problem they had with the New View is that it rejected the 1290 and the 1335, and they didn't want to reject those. So even then, the New View has different flavors, and they have different ways of distorting this history that we're reading right now. So we're going to have to, we're not going to solve this all right now. All we do know in going back to where we were, so this was letters. I have to go back here. Letters and manuscripts, so 18. Okay, so skip that. Here it is. So this is the one we were looking at. So when she says, I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844, and that time will never again be a test. What the modern Adventist scholarship does is it says that this false view of the daily that was being introduced at that time that Ellen White's arguing against has to do with time setting. So, I could ask you, why do you think she mentions, I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844 and that time would never again be a test? And ask, do you think this is connected to her statement regarding the daily? And if so, how is it connected? Right? So that would be the question that we have to answer. And we're going to look at how other people address that. And then we're going to try to address it ourselves, what we think is correct based upon Ellen White's statements. So it's not an easy task to do because the waters have been so muddied. It's like when we deal with the 2520, a lot of people argue, well, it's so complicated. And what are they saying that's actually complicated regarding the 2520? When people argue that the 2520 is complicated.
That it's repeated 4 times, it's too complex for their minds to understand.
Okay, well, I think the 2520 is pretty simple. To lay it out is easier than laying out the 2300 days, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's simpler. But I think the complexity comes from all the attacks against the 2520 and the introduction of Hebrew and all these different arguments and Ellen White's statements, which have nothing to do with the 2520 itself. That is, it's all the issues around the 2520 that create the complexity. Does that make sense to people? People agree with me on that?
Good point.
Yeah, because I think that's what they're addressing. And the same problem exists with the 2300 days. We have to have all of our scholars do all this work and research and write all these scholarly papers to support the 2300 days, which the average Adventist doesn't read. And so when it comes to looking at the whole issue, you have to be an expert, in Hebrew and Greek and archaeology and chronology and all this kind of stuff to sort through it all. And a lot of people just say, well, I can't do that. I'm not that intelligent, or I don't have that much time. And so I'm just going to accept what the church says about something, or I'm going to reject it because I want to, or whatever, But actually, and when we say something is simple, when I say something simple, it's comprehensible to somebody, or to nearly everybody, unless somebody has some kind of mental deficiencies that doesn't allow them to understand things. That is, you can easily see when you lay out the 2520 and you lay out the prophetic mirror, it's pretty simple. People see it, of all different intelligences. It's not very complicated. But if you have to deal with all the arguments, they are complicated. Now that's what we have here right now with the daily. And you're going to see when you start to look at the statements, when people study the daily, just like when they studied the 25-20. Do they study the 25-20 or do they study what everybody says about the 25-20?
Like you study what everybody else says.
Yeah. So somebody says,
Based on what everybody else says.
yeah. So they'll say, I looked into the 25-20. I said, well, what did you read? Well, I read everything Ty Gibson and all these other people wrote about it, right? And so when they'll bring up the arguments, they'll say, oh, well, I read Uriah Smith or James White, and they said, and so they'll start arguing about this point, whether Sheba is a duration or an intensity, right? So to them, that's studying the 25-20. But you ask them, well, what is the 25-20? Could you explain what it is? Well, they don't know because none of the books or articles that they read actually really state what the 25-20 is. So they haven't studied the 25-20. The same thing comes with the daily. So a friend of mine, he was studying the daily. So what was he studying? Mostly he was studying the whole issue of the daily, right? How people were addressing whether Ellen White, what her statement here means when all you were united on the correct view of the daily. But the question is, do you understand what the daily is? And his answer would be no. It doesn't make any sense to him. But even then, he's not looking at the daily itself. Now, do we have to address all of this around the daily? Or should we leave it aside? Is a question. Is it profitable to look at these arguments? Because Jeff is going to lay out the correct view of the daily, and then he's going to, like the pioneer view, and then he's going to show the new view. And could we make a case that it would be better just not to do that? Just to look at the pioneer view and not look at the new view and all the arguments?
Because we're going to be confronted with these views, the other views. That's why.
Okay, so we're going to be confronted with them, and also other people are going to be confronted with them. They're going to be influenced by them, but we also have to be really careful in how we present something. So one of the things I learned a long time ago is that when I have a disagreement with the person, I don't discuss the disagreement. I discuss the things around the topic that we can agree upon. Because a person, when they have a view, where do they build up their defenses? Or maybe I'm kind of answering the question. So somebody has a view of something. There's going to be lots of things that you can agree with them on. But if you're going to approach them on the area where they placed their defenses, are you going to be able to win them over?
No, they just dig in deeper.
Right, they dig in deeper. So you have to find a way to not address those sensitive points where the person is dug in. And that's not easy to do, because where is the person going to direct you in a discussion? Let's say you're going to talk to the 25-20 about the 25-20. Where are they going to direct you?
Where they feel the strongest,
Yeah,
where they're dug in the deepest.
Yeah, where they feel that the battle is to be fought. And I've had this situation where there are people who realize that when I'm talking to them, that I don't want to fight that battle, and they want to fight it. And they will do everything they can to bring the battle to where they have their defenses. Why do they not want to battle where they don't have defenses? I mean, it's kind of an obvious question in some ways.
Probably don't know about anything else.
Yeah, they don't know anything else, right? So if you start to talk about something they haven't heard about, the reason why they don't want to talk about it is because they don't know anything about it, and they don't feel comfortable defending it because they know they need to defend against you, right? They know you're the enemy, and they know certain territory in which they can have a battle. But if you start talking about Joseph and his story, or you start talking about Ezra 7 to 10, and they know, okay, this person's telling me something that I don't know. He's showing me things that I've never seen before, and they appear to be true. I'm going to be deceived. So I better either direct this to the point, and I'll have people do this, but the real issue is this, and they'll start to bring the point to the place where they're prepared to discuss. Now, what do you normally do if you want to win that person? If the person starts to try to bring the battle to those controverted points that they have prepared themselves for, how do you deal with that? You're having a discussion with somebody on the 2520, and they want to bring you to Great Controversy 351 or to James White's article, supposedly his article. What are you going to do?
I'm trying to use some logic with them, but I've never gotten anywhere.
Okay, well, you're not going to get anywhere by using logic with them, that's for sure. Yeah, you will not get anywhere by trying to reason with a person in that situation. Now, what's the best thing to do?
Maybe ask them what we can agree on.
Okay, you could do that. I would just basically listen to them, listen to their points, and not argue with them. Now, it's not always easy to do, especially depending on the relationship you have with that person, because there are some people you have a relationship with, and in some ways you can enjoy the battle that you have with them, right? So there are people like that you develop this relationship where you like to argue. But if you really want to win that person, you have to, in a sense, find things that you can concede or agree upon, right? Now, in a sense, if you look at my paper, why there's not a 20-year period of continual punishment for Israel found in Leviticus 26. What is the title of that paper doing?
Well, it sounds like you're disagreeing with the idea of the 2520 as a valid prophecy, which makes its opponents happy to read.
Okay, I don't think that that's what I'm doing. I mean, I don't think it says that. But what I'm doing is I'm conceding the ground on a place that I do agree. We do not believe that there is a 25-20-year prophecy for literal Israel and of continual punishment for literal Israel found in Leviticus 26. That's not what we teach, but that's how it's represented that we teach. We teach that literal Israel is punished for 25-20 years continually. But that's not what we teach, because literal Israel isn't punished continually for 25-20 years. I mean, one is they go into captivity, and then they're released from captivity, and there are decrees that allow them to go and rebuild the temple and the city. So obviously they're not being punished under the 25-20 curse or anything like that during the time that they're being restored. And they're being shown favor by Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. So we don't believe that literal Israel is punished for 25-20 years. So what I'm doing is I'm conceding the ground of where we agree upon. So once I say this is what we don't believe in, then I can show what we do believe in. Now, I don't know how effective that paper was generally, but that was my attempt anyway. And I wrote it for the elders in my church, so I didn't write it as a paper to be for the general public. But it ended up being put out. But it was just written for the elders in my church because the issue was there, and I wanted to clear up that point. So now when we're looking at this issue, so we're really just touching on some of these problems. We're not solving them yet. But the question is, when Ellen White says, I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844, and that time was never again to be a test. We have to decide what that statement has to do with the context of these other statements. And one is we have the correct view of the daily, and the next thing is we're going to have Sister Minor. Is Sister Minor's view connected with this new view that's being brought in? Other views, right? In confusion, other views have been embraced and darkness has followed. So then that's going to give us an idea of why she's bringing up the daily, or why God's showing her this about the daily. Any other thoughts on this? So we're looking at the problem. We're not solving it yet because we're going to have to dig a bit more. I'm personally going to have to dig a bit more on these points. Now, what was it that Jeff said about this statement? And I don't know if he was 100% correct on that, but what was Jeff's argument? About this passage? I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844. When he puts this up with early writings, what is he saying about the fact that I saw is removed?
Well, he was saying that when she says I saw, it meant she was bringing in a new, possibly unrelated idea. So that clause, that sentence was taken from an unrelated idea and tacked onto this paragraph in the early writings.
Yeah, and that could be possible, though we can see that there may be something connected with that, because we have Sister Minor being referred to, which in early writings, and I'm going to go to early writings here. So let's look at this all in early writings. What page is it in early writings?
I guess 74.
74, right. So it's going to be in experience and views part. Yeah, that's where it is. Okay, so now one of the things here, when you look at this, the gathering time, this vision here is September 23rd. Now the other one says October 23rd. Is it the same vision, or what's happening here? Any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of different ideas discussed.
Okay, Stephen?
Are we saying this is a month before?
Well, that's what this says in this part here. September 23rd, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand a second time to recover the remnant of his people. Now, I'm just seeing what this says. How do you look at this? See page 86. Anyway, it doesn't connect me to anything. Now, she says very similar things in October 23rd letter. And efforts must be redoubled in this gathering time. A scattering, Israel is smitten and torn, but now in the gathering time, God will heal and bind up his people. Right? So she's going to say some very similar things. So the question is, that October 23rd vision that says in letters and manuscripts, says it's October 23rd. Here we have a similar vision that's September 23rd. So that's something we're going to have to figure out. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text. Now the question is this the September 23rd vision that starts this, and is it material from the October 23rd vision that's being added? Right, so that's one thing we're going to have to look into. Anybody know anything about that? Because in early writings, it just looks like it's a September 23rd vision. And this is September 23rd, 1850, because we know it is.
I would disagree.
Okay, you would disagree about what? That it's 1850?
Yes,
Okay, where is it? 1849?
1851.
So this is September 23rd, 1851?
If you go to the original document,
Okay, so where is that? Okay.
the experience and views,
Experience and views. We're in experience and views.
but you're in the early writings.
Oh, I see what you want to go to the book called Experience and Views, which is in Spiritual Gifts. Right? Is that what you're saying? I need to go to Spiritual Gifts? Or do I have it on my here it is, Spiritual Gifts. Which one?
Now I'm on the page. It says here, "The Holiness of God" is the subtitle, and it begins the 14th of May, 1851.
Okay. Okay, so this is something we're going to have to straighten out, all these dates. So how do you get experience and views? Or where are you looking on the disc? Because I don't see
Yeah,
it.
it says it's page 60, page 61.
Okay. Okay, so experience and views. See, and I don't have that book here on the E.G. White disc. I have early writings and I have spiritual gifts. So I'm not sure where to look. Now, if I take this September 23rd, I'm going to go copy this and go to the letters and manuscripts and see if it shows up there. I could also just search. Okay, so it's not in there, so I'm going to have to go back here. So you can see how complicated this is. All this is getting all this information sorted out. So the only place it shows me this is early writings on the E.G. White disc. I'm just going to see if I take, but sometimes it's, and is it worded exactly the same? September 23rd, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out, etc.
Brother
It's
Stephen,
actually wrong. It's actually saying that September 23D.
Oh, so
Doesn't
it's
say-
got RD at the end.
Doesn't
Okay.
have
Right.
an RD.
Okay.
brothers,
Yeah.
Brother Stephen, I stand ready to be corrected, but would you kindly take a look at document Present Truth, November 1, 1850?
Yeah, that's this one right here. So this is November 1, 1850. The
Right.
Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people.
Because that is the earliest reference of this passage. And since it was published November 1, 1850, would that not seem to indicate that the September 23rd that they're referring to would have been September 23rd of 1850?
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah. Okay.
I was looking at that. The holiness, I was thinking that would have been in chronological order.
Right.
So the date before it was the 14th of May, 1851. So I was thinking this is after that.
Yeah. So we can see that even early on, Ellen White, she's putting together her visions from different places and putting them together in these papers and articles and books. So this is, yeah, November 1st, 1850. So this is the Present Truth periodical that James White had started. And he's going to have her vision listed there. But the problem that we have is when you look at this one, she's not going to mention CS minor, but she's going to say, then I was pointed to some who are in great error, that the saints are yet to go to Old Jerusalem, etc., before the Lord comes. So she's referring to this CS minor, Sister Minor's view. Such a view is calculated to take the mind and interest from the present work of God under the message of the third angel. For if we are to go to Jerusalem, then our minds will naturally be there, and our means will be withheld from other uses to get the saints to Jerusalem. I saw that the reason why they were left to go into this great error is because they have not confessed and forsaken their errors that they have been in for a number of years. So the question is this part, this whole thing, all from September 23rd? Or is September 23rd just referring to this paragraph? And then is this other stuff from October 23rd, right? So, or is October 23rd just a typo? I don't know how they could confuse September and October in a typographical error. Right, so that's something we're going to have to sort out. I'm going to have to try to dig a bit and figure that out, where the October 23rd one came from. So the September 23rd, this is where it's first published. So we didn't get back to where I wanted to. I didn't think that this would take this long to go through this part of it. But you can see the problem, right? And you can see the complexity, the way that the waters have been muddied, just even in these statements themselves. So it's not a very simple thing to just say, I saw the time is as a test, has not been a test since 1844. To say, well, Ellen White's just talking about something different. And so to go
in the
back,
present truth, I was going to say the statements in a separate own paragraph in the present truth, November 1850.
yeah. Whether that means anything, I mean, based on the original manuscript. But here you just have time has not been a test since 1844. It'll never again be a test. It doesn't have the I saw in front of it in early writings. And we also know that in early writings, it doesn't mention Sister Minor by name. It just mentions in general about this going to Old Jerusalem. And we will see that the way that this is all interpreted by this modern scholarship within Adventism is that when she's talking about the correct view on the daily, she's not talking about the correct view on the daily. She's talking about certain aspects of it, particularly that the word sacrifice has been added. And that's what the union was about. And that somehow the people who are going to New Jerusalem are focused upon this being literal, that it's a sacrifice needs to be there, and some kind of sacrifice in some way. So they muddy the whole discussion. They try to weaken this statement in the spirit of prophecy that Ellen White says that the correct view of the daily is then the pioneer view of the daily, and they try to argue that it's not. And then they're going to take her later statements where she doesn't want to be drawn into discussing the new view of the daily, which she says she has no light on. They try to make it so that she has no light on the daily at all. And that this statement here in early writings doesn't mean that she had light on the daily. It's rather complex in that sense. So we have this whole bunch of confusion that's being brought in. Yeah.
Oh boy, I'll come in and fix it for you. Oh, I'm sorry, my mic is hot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, your mic's on.
Okay. I was going to say, if you mention that there's been this change in early writings to a whole group of people that believe that the Ellen White writings have been corrupted and changed by the General Conference, they just are absolutely rabid about it. And there's just a whole group of people that are off into this thing that all of Ellen White's writings have been adulterated.
Well, and they would also have to take,
Can't
they'd have to take the view that Ellen White somehow wasn't able to preserve her writings while she was alive. I mean,
Yes.
right, because Ellen White is actually involved in putting together the book Early Writings.
Yeah, so they make a whole can of worms out of that.
Yeah, but there is a truth in that after her death, the compilations that are made, there are changes made to her writings that even when they will put together compilations, they will put things when she talks about the Holy Spirit and she says it, they will put he in there. But she calls the Holy Spirit it, not he, in many places.
And yeah, it's another area where people get all rabid about it.
Yeah. So part of the problem is that when you start to do these things, it actually creates, it fertilizes the ground for these types of fanaticism. Instead, if they had just been completely open about her writings, made them all available, it would definitely have not fed some of this craziness that goes on. But we do know that if you want to understand her statements, the best thing is to go back to how she wrote them and not look at how they've been edited, especially later on. But, it's not many places that you're really going to find a problem. There are places you do, and on certain points. But often it's more by omission than anything, where they just pick and choose certain things she says and puts them groups them together in a context that gives a different impression. And some statements that she makes, they just completely take out because, which would actually help you understand the context, but it wouldn't make the church look good. So there's those kinds of issues as well. But anyway, so you can see the problem that we're facing here. It's not an easy one in that sense. So we're gonna finish here. We're gonna close. I'm pretty sure it's 9 o'clock yet. And any final thoughts before we close with prayer? Because we're gonna have to figure out the October 23rd one, why it says October 23rd when it appears to be what we thought was the same vision on September 23rd, 1850.
I'm just gonna have to work it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try to figure this out. Why, and maybe it's just a typo in the E.G. White disc. Maybe I'll find that says September 23rd somewhere else. But anyway, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful, Lord, for the way that you help us to sort through these problems, these messes that man has made. We pray, Lord, for your Holy Spirit's guidance. Help us to understand these things correctly and be with each person today. May your angels watch over them. Help us, Lord, to trust in you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.